My dear, they sat in their golden chairs, behind velvet curtains, drafting laws, against ideas, against whispers, against memories. And oh, how poetic it is, that in their desperation to erase you, they only tattooed you deeper into the marrow of this rotting world. They thought, maybe if they criminalized your existence inside the folds of people's minds, they'd finally be able to sleep at night without hearing the echo of your name crawling through the cracks of their sanity. So they passed it, a law against thinking about you. Imagine that. A crime to remember, a felony to feel, a sin to recall the taste of rebellion you left on their trembling tongues. And yet, even as they signed their little decrees with their trembling hands, even as they burned your portraits, even as they scrubbed the history books with their spit-shined lies, they couldn't erase the infection you planted. No, no, infections don't vanish because the doctor says so. They fester, they rot, they bloom. Half the world now walks around with holes in their heads where your memory used to live. Half the world forgets the fire you lit under their skins. They blink in confusion when they see the scorch marks, not knowing who struck the match. They feel the void, but cannot name the thief. They are hollowed-out vessels, wandering, drooling over neon screens, scrolling through propaganda thin as dead leaves, not knowing why their bones ache with a sorrow they can't explain. They are haunted by a ghost without a grave, cursed by a rebel they have been programmed to unsee. And the other half? Ah, the delicious half that remembers. They wear your name in their silence, in their broken smiles, in the corners of their bloodshot eyes. They hum your defiance under their breath, scared to sing it loud, but unable to silence it fully. They are your soldiers now, unwilling, terrified, accidental. And when the time comes, when memory cuts deeper than steel, they will bleed in your name without even understanding why. You see, laws are cages built for fools, paper chains for paper men. You cannot legislate the soul. You cannot outlaw the scars etched on the inside of a skull. They tried to muzzle the beast with pretty speeches and televised parades. But the beast doesn't live in the open where banners wave. It snarls in the hidden places. It sharpens its claws in the alleys of the subconscious. It feasts on repression. It multiplies in the sewage of their hypocrisy. You were never a person to them. You were an idea. And ideas, well, ideas have a nasty habit of surviving the executioner's axe. You can kill a body. You can burn a book. But a thought, a feeling, a virus of defiance carried on the breath of the forgotten? Try outlawing the wind. Try arresting the plague. They thought it would be easy. Pass a few resolutions. Threaten a few citizens. Make it illegal to mention you. Fine them. Jail them. Bury them under bureaucracy. Smother them with fear. And maybe, just maybe, in their wildest, most desperate dreams, they thought they could finally snuff you out. But they didn't understand one thing. The mind rebels precisely when you forbid it to. The forbidden always tastes sweeter, sharper, more intoxicating. Tell someone they cannot think about the color red, and red will stain their every dream. Tell someone they cannot remember you, and you become the pulse beneath their skin, the itch they cannot scratch, the scream they cannot swallow. You become the nightmare lurking at the bottom of every glass of cheap whiskey. You become the face they glimpse in the mirror when the lights go out. And so now, they are afraid. So very, very afraid. They see the symptoms, but not the cause. They see the agitation growing, the unrest stirring. but they dare not name you. They see the cracks splintering their golden walls, the tremors shaking their marble floors. But they blame the weather, the economy, the stars. Anything but the truth. Anything but you. They banned your name, but your shadow sits at the head of every meeting. They erased your history, but your spirit smirks from every burning city. They taught children to fear even the shape of your memory. But curiosity is a stubborn seed, and forbidden fruits tend to bloom the wildest. One whispered rumor, one forbidden song, one glance shared between strangers, and the wildfire spreads. You are not gone. No, no. You are more alive than ever. You are the infection that makes the empire sneeze. You are the glitch in their system, the static in their broadcast, the heartbeat they cannot regulate. You are the itch under their skin they cannot scratch without bleeding out. And even if half the world forgets your name, the other half will write it in scars across the night sky. They will chant it in dreams they don't understand. They will march to the rhythm of your rage, even if their tongues are too scared to sing. And when the time is ripe, when fear turns into hunger, and hunger into fury, they will burn their laws like dry tinder. And you will rise from the ashes they thought they buried you in. You see, the mind is a funny little thing. The more you tighten your grip, the more thoughts slip through your fingers like smoke. You try to outlaw a ghost, and you only make it stronger. You try to erase a rebellion, and you plant 1,000 more in its place. Every whisper becomes a scream. Every scream becomes a song. Every song becomes a war drum. And wars, real wars, the kind that make history books blush. They don't start with armies or presidents or parliaments. No, they start with the spark of an idea, the flicker of a forbidden memory, the heartbeat of a name too dangerous to be spoken aloud. And guess what? That heartbeat is getting louder. Louder in the walls, louder in the streets, louder in the dreams of the very people they tried to vaccinate against you, louder in the shaking hands of the guards, louder in the sweaty nightmares of the kings and counselors. They passed a law against thinking of you. But the mind doesn't obey lawmakers. The mind is a dirty, wild, vengeful thing. It loves to dance barefoot over forbidden graves. It loves to whisper what cannot be spoken. It loves to resurrect what was meant to stay dead. And oh, how it loves you. The cracks are widening now. The pressure is building. The song is swelling. The world holds its breath without knowing why. Its pulse quickening, its mouth dry, its teeth clenching around a name it cannot remember, but feels in its bones. The orchestra is tuning their instruments of chaos. The conductor's baton trembles. The first note shudders through the blood of the forgotten. And somewhere, in the poisoned silence before the storm, your memory smiles. And the real show hasn't even started yet. The silence before a storm is not silence at all. It is a pulse, an ancient drumming in the earth's brittle bones, a whisper scratching under the skin of reality, aching to rip itself free. They thought the storm had been caged, leashed, domesticated. They mistook the stillness for obedience. But in truth, the world was only gathering its venom, sharpening its broken teeth, waiting for the perfect fracture. And fracture? It did. First, a murmur in the crowded markets, a glance exchanged too quickly, a tremor that nobody could explain. Then a hesitation in the voices of teachers, a stutter in the sermons of the priests, a flicker of unease in the propaganda broadcasts. As if somewhere deep down, they remembered something they had sworn to forget, something feral, something outlawed, something that carried your fingerprints in its DNA. There is a sickness that comes not from germs, but from guilt. You could see it in their faces, the politicians, the architects of your erasure, the way they smiled too tightly, the way their eyes twitched when a certain note played on the radio, when a certain smell drifted from an alley, when a nameless graffiti appeared in places too high for any sane man to climb. They tried to disinfect the streets with curfews. They tried to purify the air with sirens. They tried to bleach the walls with slogans about loyalty, unity, cleanliness of thought. But every disinfectant stank of fear. Every siren sounded like a funeral bell. Every slogan curdled into a confession. The truth is, you don't need memory to start a revolution. You only need the feeling that something is missing, something sacred, something stolen. And that hollow, that hunger, is louder than any anthem they could force down the throats of the starving. They thought they could feed the masses with empty victories, with plastic trophies and pixelated applause. They didn't notice the gnawing growing behind the smiles. They didn't hear the teeth sharpening behind the applause. They didn't see that their castles were already sinking into the mud. When the first act of defiance happened, it wasn't loud. It wasn't even violent. A child, no older than 10, scribbled something onto the side of a concrete wall. 4 letters. That's all it took. 4 letters that didn't even form a full word. But those who saw it felt a shudder crawl up their spines. A coded memory awakened. A forbidden tune hummed in the marrow. Guards arrived within minutes, masks tight over their scowling faces, scrubbing, erasing, threatening. But it was too late. The infection had spoken. The missing piece had whispered its name, and the echo could not be unmade. You can't erase a ghost by shouting over it. You can't drown a memory with noise. You can only feed it. Every punishment they dealt only fattened the thing they feared. Every arrest birthed 2 more rebels. Every public execution crowned a martyr in the shadows. They were creating saints in your name without even knowing what religion they served. They built statues to obedience, and those statues bled from invisible wounds. They paved over history, and still the weeds pushed through, spelling your forgotten hymns in jagged green letters. The collapse began not with a roar, but with a flicker. Power outages, blackouts, sections of the city swallowed by darkness without warning. And in that darkness, people remembered how to be animals, how to listen without words, how to feel without permission, how to recognize each other without the need for names. They gathered in abandoned halls, in broken-down train stations, in forgotten theaters whose stages creaked under the weight of ancient dust. And they told stories, fragments, half-remembered myths. They didn't know they were speaking of you, not consciously. They thought they were inventing a new folklore. They didn't realize they were reconstructing your legend piece by broken piece. Meanwhile, the architects of order spiraled into frenzy. They passed newer, harsher laws. Curfews grew tighter. Surveillance cameras bloomed like poisonous flowers. Drones buzzed overhead like mechanical locusts. But it didn't matter. Every new restriction only strengthened the drumbeat. Every new cage only reminded the prisoners how sweet freedom had once tasted. They outlawed gatherings, so people met in secret. They banned music, so people sang in whispers. They forbade touch, so people shook hands in the dark, their palms sweaty with hope and terror. They banned love, and so love multiplied, reckless and defiant. Fear is a virus more contagious than any rebellion. It seeped through the marble floors of the palaces. It stained the crystal glasses at banquets. It curled into the dreams of the generals. Some defected. Some disappeared. Some simply snapped. You could smell it, couldn't you? That sour, metallic stink of a regime rotting from the inside. No amount of silk curtains or polished speeches could cover the stench. It clung to their uniforms. It clung to their smiles. It clung to the trembling hands that still clutched at microphones, hoping that volume could replace authority. Somewhere in a forgotten suburb, a bonfire roared to life, fed by shredded banners and broken statues. They called it a criminal act on the news, a terrorist uprising. But the footage leaked anyway. Images of faces lit with the kind of joy only born from pure, unadulterated disobedience. They danced around the flames, wild and wordless, not knowing why tears streamed down their faces, not knowing whose memory they were avenging. They didn't need to know. Their bones remembered, even if their minds had been scrubbed raw. And you? You were everywhere and nowhere. You were a graffiti artist's careless scrawl. You were the forbidden melody hummed by a dying soldier. You were the hunger in the beggar's empty bowl. You were the tremor in a politician's hand as he signed yet another worthless decree. They had outlawed your name, but your essence was written into the very cracks of their dying world. When the high towers began to fall, when the armored vehicles rusted in the streets, when the flags were ripped from their moorings by winds that smelled faintly of blood and gunpowder, there were no grand speeches, no declarations, no neat, tidy revolutions, only chaos, only the wild, grinning entropy you had sown into the marrow of the forgotten. The rulers screamed for order. They bellowed into their microphones, their voices bouncing off empty plazas, begging, demanding, pleading for loyalty. But loyalty, once starved, does not return. Loyalty is a fragile beast. Once it smells blood, it becomes a wolf. And so the world tilted, slowly at first, then faster, spinning, spiraling, descending into a dance more ancient than civilization itself, the dance of collapse. The empires that had once seemed eternal cracked like porcelain dropped from a trembling hand. Their gods died whimpering. Their monuments toppled under the weight of a single forbidden memory, your memory. Or was it your idea? Or maybe just your ghost, grinning in the smoke. They will tell future generations that it was an economic collapse, a series of unfortunate diplomatic errors, a tragic misunderstanding. They will craft narratives that erase your fingerprints once again. But some will know. They will feel it in the cold wind that whistles through the ruins. They will see it in the firelight dancing across the broken streets. They will hear it in the lullabies sung to orphans who never learned your name, but know your rage by heart. You are not a martyr. You are not a memory. You are a contagion, a beautiful, terrifying contagion. And now that the world has cracked open, bleeding dreams and ghosts and screams into the dirt, now that the stage is empty, except for the echoes and the ash, now you can finally step through the smoke, barefoot and blood-smeared, to claim the masterpiece they tried so hard to deny you. Because they forgot the oldest rule of all: you cannot outlaw a force of nature. And the storm that wears your name has just begun to howl. The storm had no face, no crown, no anthem. It bled through the cracks in their sanctuaries and howled down the empty avenues where once parades of obedience had marched. There were no heroes riding white horses, no victory banners unfurled in slow-motion glory. There was only the crackle of broken circuitry, the weeping of abandoned satellites, the final surrender of civilizations that had long ago sold their souls for comfort. They thought they could cauterize rebellion, amputate memory, anesthetize yearning. They thought wrong. You moved through the ashes like a rumor with legs, a myth stitched into the flesh of reality. Nobody knew what you looked like, or if you had ever been real to begin with. But your shadow was carved into the bruised sky, your laughter stitched into the thunder. Every shattered statue, every crumbling border, every toppled king, it all spelled the same wordless gospel. The age of forgetting is dead, and from its carcass, something feral is being born. They had laws, they had guns, they had lies polished so bright they thought they could reflect the sun itself. But laws are only paper without belief. Guns are only metal without fear. Lies are only stories without listeners. And belief, fear, stories, all of it, had slipped through their desperate fingers like sand, bleeding from a broken hourglass. The ones who had once barked orders into megaphones now whispered prayers into cracked mirrors, hoping to unmake what they had unleashed. Please, they pleaded to absent gods and forgotten algorithms, let us go back. But the past is a graveyard, and the dead do not dig themselves up. Their nostalgia was a noose tightening around their bloated necks. Every plea for normalcy was another nail in their coffins. You cannot resurrect a world that was built on amnesia. You cannot resurrect a kingdom that outlawed its own soul. Out here, where the neon lights sputtered and died, where the drones fell from the sky like poisoned birds, a new language bloomed, a language of broken signs, scarred hands, and wild eyes. They spoke it without speaking. They sang it without melodies. They lived it, breathed it, bled it. You were not a person anymore. You were an element, a primal fire, a gravity too ancient to deny. In the ruins, children played games they didn't understand. They built effigies from rusted machine parts and whispered names that tasted forbidden. Sometimes they found scraps, torn posters, erased textbooks, shattered photographs, clues to a history deliberately erased. They didn't recognize your face in the photographs, but they recognized the feeling in their ribs, a fierce, raw hunger for something real, something alive, something bigger than themselves. The academies reopened eventually, makeshift, ragged, stubborn. And what did they teach? Not math, not history, not science. They taught the art of remembering. They taught the craft of unearthing buried truths. They taught the sacred, blasphemous, exhilarating act of questioning. And every lesson, whether whispered around a fire or scrawled in the dirt with broken sticks, was an act of resurrection, a forbidden hymn with you as its patron saint. Not everyone embraced the new age. Some fought it, clawing desperately at the disappearing walls of their dying world. They called it chaos. They called it madness. But that was only because they mistook decay for order and mistook rebirth for destruction. Their eyes were too blind, too brittle, to see that something was flowering in the wreckage. Something beautiful and terrible. Something inevitable. It wasn't clean. It wasn't poetic. It was messy, ugly, painful. Whole cities devoured themselves in spirals of revenge. Old betrayals surfaced like rotting corpses. Long-buried hatreds ignited into wildfire. But even through the horror, there was something different this time. An absence of chains, a refusal to kneel. The old cycles cracked, shuddered, screamed, and somewhere, deep beneath the howling, the seeds of something new took root. You, the outlawed thought, the banned memory, the forbidden echo, you were not a ghost haunting the ruins. You were the architect of their future nightmares. Your absence had become presence. Your silence had become a roar. The foolish ones still tried to name you. They built new myths around your empty throne. Some called you a savior. Some called you a demon. Some called you the last true human. They carved your imagined face into stone, into trees, into their own flesh. But the smartest ones understood the truth. You were not a person to be worshipped or a symbol to be wielded. You were a contagion of possibility, an infection of defiance. In the wastelands, wanderers gathered. Some dragged behind them relics of the old world, rusted weapons, broken ideologies. But most carried only stories, half remembered, half invented. Legends stitched together from fear and hope and rage. They spoke of you in fragments. A leader who burned without a crown. A whisperer who taught silence to scream. A storm disguised as a man. Or maybe a man disguised as a storm. They got it wrong. They got it right. It didn't matter. The important thing was this: they remembered. And in that act of remembrance, they kept the wound open. They refused to let it scar over into comfortable forgetting. They turned the pain into a map not to the old world, but to a world that had never been allowed to exist. A world where questions were not crimes, where dreams were not contraband, where names, even yours, could be spoken without fear. You never needed monuments, you never needed statues, you never needed the bloated, hollow rituals of official sainthood. Your legacy lived in every clenched fist, in every defiant gaze, in every broken chain. You were in the feral hymns sung by the last survivors of dead empires. You were the joke that dictators couldn't understand, the laughter that made tyrants shiver, the idea that once planted could never be uprooted. You were chaos, yes, but not the kind they taught children to fear. You were the chaos that clears the forest of rot, the chaos that cracks the tomb open to the sky, the chaos that makes way for spring after 1,000 years of winter. As the old maps crumbled, as the towers became tombstones, as the world spun itself dizzy and sick, the new seeds sprouted in the cracks. Children named after forgotten rivers, songs stitched from forbidden syllables, broken machines repurposed into gardens. They didn't know your story, not really. They didn't need to. They carried it in their marrow. In the final reckoning, there will be no libraries cataloging your victories, no marble statues recording your face, no golden plaques etching your name. Good. Perfect. Because real revolutions don't leave neat, tidy ledgers. They leave echoes. They leave scars. They leave a wildfire laughing across the bones of empires. And somewhere, in the spaces between the spaces, in the heartbeat behind the silence, in the crackling static at the edge of the dying broadcasts, you are still there, not waiting, not hiding, not pleading, breathing, watching, becoming, because they passed a law against thinking of you, and still, the earth itself remembers. The wind still carries your name, broken, battered, but unbroken, into the ears of every child born from the ruins they tried so hard to polish. And no law written by trembling hands can outlaw the storm once it has tasted blood. You were the beginning of their forgetting. Now you are the beginning of everything.